And it's time now for our Monday morning quarterbacks. The president-elect will be in Prince George's County Saturday at the Army-Navy game. The visit, though, comes after making some statements during an interview Sunday. We want to get into what was said and more with our panelists Jennifer Nassour and Antjuan Seawright. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
And with the interview, we're referring to Meet the Press. President-elect Trump, he talked about sweeping changes that he plans to make once he takes office on January 20th. I'll begin with you, Jennifer. What were some of the key messages that stood out for you?
Well, I think some of the things that stood out to me were the things that he would change and the things he wouldn't change. He said that he wouldn't change access to abortion pills. He said that the federal minimum wage is a little too low, is a low number. He said he wasn't going to increase the age for Social Security and Medicare. I think that those were all issues that kind of came up during the campaign that people were whispering about, and he put those out. I think the other thing that he said is that he's going to talk about dreamers being deported at the very last part of this, and that they have to figure something out because a lot of the people have been here their entire lives and they don't speak their native language anymore. So, you know, his mass deportations, starting with criminals. I think that's what people wanted to hear, is that the first people out of the country are the criminals.
The Dreamers conversation, definitely the headline out of that conversation. Antjuan, what do you make of his comments on that and other remarks?
Well, I think Donald Trump has a pattern and history of saying one thing and doing another. So this whole game of what he would do, what he says as president-elect and what he do as president of the United States will be a wait-and-see game. Probably one of the most stand-out-ish things from that interview when he essentially said that Benny Thompson, Liz Cheney, and others, Congressman from Mississippi, former Congresswoman, should essentially be put in jail for doing the jobs that were required of them in the moment. And I think that should be a pause for all of us as Americans, because now he's also talking about pardoning insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol. And here we are having these, I think, unnecessary conversations about the president of the United States pardoning his son for things that you and I would not even be in a conversation about if it wasn't for the fact that Hunter Biden was Joe Biden's son.
I want to get into really the word of the year, according to Merriam-Webster, polarization. I mean, we see that all the time in the political space. I'm curious to know, are there any policies that you believe President-elect Trump could enact or possibly strengthen under his term that most people would agree upon? Antjuan, I'll stick with you and then end with you, Jennifer.
Oh, I don't know. But what I think most people would say about the word polarization is that we have a modern-day Republican Party that's gone to the extreme end of that word, and we're going to see if the campaign overlays with how they govern. And I think this whole game is a wait-and-see game. I don't think there's one thing that the president-elect would do that most people would agree on, except the fact that he says he wants to strengthen the economy to make certain that the economy works for everyone and gas, goods, and groceries are once again affordable. We'll see what that means.
Jennifer?
Well, I have to say, I think what Antjuan was just saying is the exact definition of polarization. The Democratic Party lost not just the presidential in the popular vote, but also lost both houses of Congress. So I would have to say that I think the American people actually believe that it is the left that is the polarizing side. That's number one. Number two, I think that, you know, we saw in his comments about the Social Security, about the access to abortion pills. I think, you know, working on the economy, making sure that there are opportunities for everyone, for all of our kids to be able to be successful, to be able to start businesses, to be able to have access to education and for good housing. Those are all important things. And it's going to start with deporting the people who are here, taking away those opportunities from other Americans.
I think most people want the same thing, but there are different ways to get there ultimately. But a better economy has to be top of mind for the new administration. Jennifer Nassour, Antjuan Seawright, thank you so much for joining us and for keeping it civil on this Monday morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.